Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are tackling something absolutely massive, profound, and honestly magnificent in its scope. We're talking about the saving work of Christ. But listen, we aren't just going to rehash this in vague, abstract terms. Oh no, we're going to visually map out a highly structured theological framework developed by Dr. Robert A. Peterson. I want you to think of this like we're rolling out an architectural blueprint. We're literally going to examine the foundation, the load-bearing pillars, and the overarching design of an incredibly complex theological concept, straight from Dr. Peterson's analysis.
So have you ever actually stopped to wonder how theologians picture the ultimate saving event? I mean, when you're dealing with something as expansive as salvation, how do scholars even begin to categorize such complex, ancient ideas? How do they take the cross and the empty tomb and organize them into a framework that makes logical, structured sense? Well, that is exactly the puzzle Dr. Peterson sets out to solve. And that brings us right to our roadmap for today. We'll start off with the 6 pictures of saving work, then lay down the foundation of penal substitution, and finally, we'll map out the 3 directions of the cross, which includes the upward dimension and the downward and horizontal impacts. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the 6 pictures of saving work.
When you first dive into historical theological texts, you really have to wrap your head around the sheer variety of ways this topic is addressed. Just take a second to think about that number, 13. Theologians like John McIntyre list 13 entirely distinct images of salvation in Scripture. We're talking words like ransom, sacrifice, liberation, example. It's a lot. But Dr. Peterson actually narrows this wide field down by using some very specific biblical criteria, like how often certain words occur and their deep roots in the Old Testament. He distills this massive list into something much more manageable.
And here's the distilled list. These are his 6 major pictures. We've got ransom or redemption, reconciliation, sacrifice, Christus victor, second Adam new creation, and penal substitution. Now, Peterson makes a point to note that while all of these are crucial, the second Adam picture is historically the most neglected. But here is the real kicker for our blueprint today. While these might sound like 6 equal pillars, Dr. Peterson argues that one specific picture serves as the absolute anchor for all the rest.
Which brings us to Section 2, the foundation, penal substitution.
Okay, so we are shifting from that flat landscape of 6 equal pictures to revealing the actual solid bedrock of this entire theological architecture, and that is penal substitution. Essentially, this is the doctrine that Christ took the legal penalty for sin upon himself as a substitute for humanity. To put it in everyday terms, imagine someone taking on a massive, insurmountable legal debt of yours and paying it off completely so you don't have to. Dr. Peterson makes a pretty striking claim here. He argues this isn't just one picture out of 6, it is the necessary foundation that the other 5 rely on entirely. To really get his argument, let's look at how this idea of substitution runs through the other concepts.
Take the concept of ransom, for instance. We have a great quote from scholar Howard Marshall here, interpreting that famous passage in Mark 10:45. He describes it as the ransom price paid to God for the redemption of mankind from death. Peterson uses this to show that the very idea of a ransom, buying someone back, is conceptually loaded with substitution. Someone's life is literally given in exchange, as a substitute for another.
And this ties in beautifully with the concept of redemption. Dr. Peterson brings in Graham Cole's analysis of Galatians 3:13 to make this point. Cole points out the literal marketplace language being used by Paul. He says, "A price is paid to set a slave free, and the price of this redemption is unfathomable." You see, you really can't have this kind of biblical redemption without a substitute stepping in to pay that unfathomable legal price. The foundational bedrock of substitution is always right there beneath the surface.
Let's move on to Section 3, the 3 directions of the cross.
Now that we've laid down that bedrock of penal substitution, Dr. Peterson's framework gets incredibly spatial and dynamic. It's almost 3D. He argues that the saving work points in 3 distinct directions. First, it reaches upward, targeting God himself, which results in the satisfaction of justice or propitiation. Second, it drives downward, targeting spiritual enemies, resulting in their absolute defeat. And third, it stretches horizontally, targeting humanity and physical creation, resulting in a sweeping cosmic reconciliation. So upward, downward, and horizontal.
But before we break those directions down, we have to address a major debate in historical theology regarding how these work. On one side, you have Gustav Holein's famous Christus Victor view, which argues that a dramatic victory over enemies completely replaces the idea of legal substitution altogether. But on the other side, Peterson, echoing theologian Sinclair Ferguson, argues the exact opposite. They state that the victory over downward enemies is actually achieved through and precisely because the legal penalty was substituted. Basically, the legal foundation is what secures the dramatic victory.
That brings us to Section 4, the upward dimension. With that debate in mind, we arrive at what is perhaps the most profound and, frankly, mind-bending aspect of this whole framework. Listen to this astonishing theological claim. The work of Christ most profoundly affects the life of God himself. In Peterson's architectural framework, the entire initiative starts with God, and incredibly, it terminates on God. The Trinity acts through the cross to satisfy its own justice and reconcile itself. Let that sink in for a second. God is influencing God.
So, think of the upward direction as the spark for a massive chain reaction. Step 1. God moves upward to propitiate his own justice. Step 2. Because those legal demands are met, it triggers the downward defeat of spiritual enemies, because they simply have no more legal claim to hold on to. Step 3. With enemies defeated and justice completely met, this opens the door for the horizontal reconciliation of all creation. Without that first upward, Godward action, the other directions literally wouldn't exist.
And finally, Section 5, the downward and horizontal impacts. Let's explore how that upward foundation explodes outward to impact the rest of the cosmos, starting with the downward impact. Peterson, drawing heavily on Colossians 2, explains that this direction routs the devil, subjugates demons, defeats death, and conquers hell. He references this incredible metaphor from scholar F.F. Bruce. Bruce suggests that when spiritual enemies saw the legal bill of human debt nailed to the cross, they howled with delight. They thought they had won the ultimate victory. But God completely turns the tables on them. Because the substitute paid the penalty, those demonic forces are instantly stripped of their weapons and legally routed. It is a total, absolute downward victory.
Then we get to the horizontal impact. This spreads outward to redeem human slaves of sin, but Peterson is quick to emphasize that it goes way, way further than just humanity. Christ's obedience as the second Adam literally lifts the cosmic curse from the physical world itself. It regenerates all things, eventually leading to the creation of a new heavens and a new earth. This horizontal dimension is all about restoring the entirety of the created cosmos, the very physical world we live in right now, to its intended flawless glory.
To tie this entire structural framework together, Dr. Peterson relies heavily on a quote from Sinclair Ferguson. Ferguson writes, "The dramatic aspect of the atonement involves a triumph that is secured through propitiation. It all connects. The downward, dramatic triumph over evil and the horizontal triumph over the cursed creation. They are definitively secured through that foundational upward propitiation. The whole architectural structure just holds together seamlessly."
As we wrap up this blueprint, Peterson concludes by doing something really important, acknowledging the limits of human understanding. The profound mystery at the center of this framework is that God became a man to satisfy the demands of his own character. It's a massive, breathtaking architecture of grace. And at the end of the day, Peterson admits that it's a framework slightly beyond full human comprehension. We can map out the blueprint, sure, but we can't fully grasp its bottomless depths.
And that brings us to our final thought today, a quote from Romans 11:33 that perfectly sums up Dr. Peterson's ultimate takeaway. "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways." So here's a question to leave you with. When we map out theological blueprints like this, do we walk away feeling like we've cleverly solved a puzzle? Or does a structured understanding of these ancient texts actually leave us with an even deeper, more profound sense of awe at the sheer mystery they present? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep asking great questions.